Welcome to Don't Fear the Weight podcast with your host Vicky Mirceta, bringing together science and personal experience.
And welcome to the next episode of Don't Fear the Weight podcast with your tiny titan host Vicky Mirceta. I am glad to be back. With me today I've got a very, very special guest. He is Martin MacDonald. Everybody knows of him through the Mac Nutrition Uni site. Well, I hope that you do anyway, and if you don't, you are certainly going to remember this guy from here on in. So good morning, Martin. How are you?
Hi Vicky, I'm well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. It's lovely to have you here, and I'm really, really excited to get into this subject. So without further ado, let's just get straight into it. If you could give the listeners a little bit of a background about who you are, what your interests are, and why you have come on to Don't Fear the Weight podcast today, that would be great.
Sure, yeah. So I suppose my background is in sports nutrition. So originally I competed in natural bodybuilding for 5 years with the NPA and BMBF, and it was I suppose one of the reasons I'm quite passionate about education at the minute is because I did so much wrong and made life loads harder for myself. And I think a few of the things that interestingly, I don't think you know this, but maybe you do, maybe you've done your background research, but they're kind of, I suppose, close to my heart with regards to information. So it'd be really cool to talk about those. Sure. And I was competing from the age of 18, so doing the juniors, and then all the way up until I was 23. So I went to university, studied sports science, and then a postgraduate in sports performance nutrition, and then went on to do a postgraduate in clinical nutrition. And so my academic knowledge was being kind of developed on one hand, and then on the other hand, my practical knowledge, I suppose, was being developed to some extent, but obviously I was learning about things with myself and with other people I ended up helping or advising. And but at the same time, there was a certain mismatch of understanding something that was academic. And I can't remember where I heard, I did my own 10 minutes of research on you. And I think I heard you say somewhere about kind of the science and the practical stuff coming together. Or I don't know if maybe that's the tagline for the podcast. I'm sounding like an idiot, but anyway. It was only once I then graduated from everything, started my nutrition consultancy in Mac Nutrition, and I was working with both elite athletes and then general public individuals, and I worked with some kind of minor celebrity types, and that's what really took me into the area of weight loss and for general population as opposed to kind of physique stuff. And it was only then I started to realize how much kind of misinformation I believed or I was saying. And I was in a unique position where I was lecturing nutrition, so I was still having to do develop myself, read stuff, put together information. And personally, I love public speaking and next best podcasts, and next best after that Instagram stories. So all of that kind of stuff that it just then developed further and further. And then now as you've kind of already said, in the last, whatever it is, 18 months, we've developed this nutrition qualification with the sole purpose of finally bringing truly evidence-based nutrition information to practitioners, nutrition enthusiasts. And, as you know, it's kind of blown up to an extent that I never, in my wildest dreams kind of imagined. Tagline of like the UK's first, and then within our first intake we were in, I think it was 30 different countries, and wow. we thought we were going to be, and we were like, oh, if we get 50 people on our first intake, it'd be amazing. Like, it's a big financial investment for people, it's a 12-month course, all this kind of stuff, and we capped it at 150 people,
right?
Like capping it is like that's the most we could take on, but thinking 50 would be phenomenal. And then 150 filled, 150 people on a waiting list, 1,000 people expressing interest, and it was like, oh my goodness. So I haven't slept for a year, and yeah. So, and that's where we're at now. Like the consultancy side of our business, I suppose. Whenever I do a podcast, I always sort of want to say to people, please don't reach out to me for kind of nutrition coaching or any of that kind of stuff, because personally, at the minute, I just don't have any time for it. But even our consultancy, my staff, we're not taking on any clients yet. So, go and speak to the other amazing people out there and giving that advice, and just follow me on social media and ask me questions for free. Is kind of what I say to people. So yeah, that's a kind of whistle-stop tour of everything that's going on, and yeah.
Fantastic, really good background. And just a quick interlude of that one, you've got a new intake coming up soon as well, haven't you? Do you want to give us some information about the new intake actually?
Yeah, so one of the things, because we didn't realize obviously I'm trying to grow my team, but because I'm quite picky on people and want to develop them well and make sure that we're delivering the best at all times, we still do cap at that 150 level. So what we did was we're now running them kind of 6 months, and then another one starts. So the last one started in September, just gone. So whatever we're in now, a couple of months in. And the next one is due to start then in March. And so enrollments do open in December. And I think, like, I'm not a marketer. I don't know if you saw my post on Facebook recently, but basically someone contacted me saying, oh, do you know of any nutrition courses?
God, I did see that. That was so funny. Really.
I honestly am like, because that's happened 3 times in quite a short space of time. And I obviously did that funny, well, what I thought was a funny response. And yeah, like, I'm just not very good at marketing, obviously, but something's going well anyway. So yeah, it starts in December. And the thing that I always say to people is, like, once it opens, like, it does fill, it fills even before, like, there's a enrollment window, but it fills up way before that. And after it fills, I really upsets me that people are like, oh, please let me on. And I'd love to. And, like, I feel so bad. And I'm like, why didn't you sign up to the priority list? And they're like, I did, but it went to my spam folder.
Oh.
Just go, don't be the person who goes, oh yeah, I will do that, and then save it till the last date and they're all gone. So yeah, enrollment's open in December for the March 2018 intake. And I suppose I'll say it now, that the website is the Mac-Nutrition Uni website. Lots of people say to me, oh, I've been on your website and it doesn't say anything about nutrition course. And of course they're on the Mac Nutrition website, which is just our working with individuals website. So it's the mac-nutritionuni.com. And there's only 2 pages people need to look at. It's the course options, whether they want to do like the one which has got a bit of face-to-face learning, or the full online version. Again, I get that question. Oh, I'm looking at the full online one. Do you have to attend anything? And I'm like, no, the clue's kind of in the title, full online. Like, it's really just all online. So yeah, so thanks for the ability to kind of tell people about that. And yeah, so thanks.
Excellent. Okay, so I'll make sure that I put that link actually in the comments box underneath the YouTube channel, guys. So make sure that if you do want to enroll on the new course starting in 2018, get yourself on there and enroll early so you don't miss out. All right, so straight into the subject of what we're really interested in talking and hearing from you about as well today, Martin, is the subject of digestion. Now, digestion to me is a really, really important aspect that a lot of people aren't taking into consideration. And that would be through, through competition prep, I suppose, and general lifestyle clients, and especially coming out of a bodybuilding season and going into an off season. You've heard of the recovery diet that a lot of people are doing these days, which is basically just shoving yourself straight into a surplus with lots and lots of clean food in order to get that body level back up to a safe and healthy level. But what kind of problematic things can you run into by overloading your system immediately after kind of underloading it, if you understand what I mean by that. I've got a brilliant use of words, as you can well imagine, especially if they're going to be doing it through clean foods first of all. So let's have a look at like digestion of clean foods in a massive surplus coming from a deficit. What's your viewpoint?
Yeah, so it's one of these situations where I suppose it's always funny when we talk about clean foods in the bodybuilding world, and then you've got one bodybuilder who I know when I was competing, the foods that were unclean, you've obviously got like the quite easy distinction of heavily processed, like a chocolate bar, for instance, and then clean food as brown rice, for instance, whatever, and then, but I don't know what, you know, I'm a bit out of touch, but then when I was competing, it was like, oh, you shouldn't really be consuming milk. And there was this weird false dichotomy of people were like, no, don't drink milk, sodium will make you hold water, blah, blah, blah. And then, but then drinking a protein shake. And so this whole thing of like, so when I competed, I literally went, you know, whatever, 12 to 24 weeks with no milk, no cheese, any of these kind of things, still consuming some whey. And then, you know, coming onto your digestion question as well, after that, you do get this down regulation of the lactase enzyme when you cut dairy, when you know, dramatically reduce it. And then, you know, so let's say you put dairy back in, because it's not necessarily enough, because we're focused on like kind of whole unprocessed foods in this first part of the question. Dairy, people do find they get this like quite a lot of bloating, or they get kind of quite a lot of gas, and all of these different things related to this down regulation of the lactase enzyme. So it's one area that it's so easily, some people just are like, oh, I'll just put up with it because it does eventually right itself. But there are you know, those people who are like, you know, I'd rather not be like really bloated and have gas, and, you know, what can I do? And it's as simple as not hammering back in certain foods too quickly and just tapering them back up, because all it is just switching back on the production of this enzyme. So obviously some people don't have the ability to do that, but they're kind of lifelong lactose intolerant. Likewise, there's a syndrome which is more related to eating disorders, and, you know, we can discuss the kind of difference between an eating disorder and disordered eating within the world of kind of competitive, even just competitive sport, not necessarily like the extreme that we take physique sports to in terms of eating and body fat levels and these kind of things. So, but even so, in the eating disorder realm of under eating, and there's something called refeeding syndrome. So basically pushing, you know, boatloads of calories back in, whether, you know, regardless really of where they come from, there can be issues related to that. The one that I think probably most people have encountered that is disparate from refeeding syndrome and just this whole putting back in loads of foods is just the digestive issues of either, and it kind of goes one of two ways, syndrome, irritable bowel syndrome, you know, indicative of constipation, and then IBS-D with some diarrhea and those kind of things, loose stools. So I think one key thing is just, it's boring advice, but it's to taper food back in a bit more slowly. And that is, like, we all know how difficult it is to, you know, post show. I think we're going to touch on, you know, whatever binging or, you know, all those kind of things, post show weight gain and these kind of things. But lots of people, it is, you know, whatever people end their diets on, 1,200 calories, 1,600 calories, whatever, and they're on 5,000 calories 24 hours later, or, you know, by that evening. So it is just having some restraint in that area. And if they are getting that from oats, high fiber foods, even, you know, vegetables, I'm not sure how many competitive athletes chuck in boatloads of vegetables post show, but I'm sure some people do. And the more neurotic of us. And yeah, those do come with their issues of kind of fermentable fibers. So they are going to leave people with these kind of gastrointestinal distress. So it is, you know, the eventual advice is take these things back in slowly. There is upregulation with these things, so you're not going to have to constantly stay low. But if you want to minimize some of those negative effects, doing it a bit more slowly is pertinent.
Okay, excellent. So that's some really good advice there, just tapering it up slowly, but obviously getting yourself into a surplus to bring that body weight back up in a safe manner as well. Okay, awesome. So let's have a look at the post-show binge, or this can even relate to generalistic lifestyle clients as well, from being on a low-calorie diet for a really long time. The post-show binge, I've seen a lot of people these days actually recently just going straight in for cookies and ice cream and pizzas and various other bits like that. What kind of problem? And they can do this for like weeks as well, you know, a week, 2 weeks, and they just kind of say, well, I need to get my body weight back up. But I've always been of the impression that you can work as, well, let's say a competitive athlete. You can work very, very hard for years on end as a bodybuilder, trying to get your tolerance for carbohydrates, especially, up to a certain level, and become extremely insulin sensitive. Now, would that post-show binge with a boatload of cookies and high sugary foods and things like that, would that have any kind of impact onto your tolerance of carbohydrates and your glucose receptors, for example? And obviously you're primed and ready to lay down a load of body fat as well, aren't you, being so lean? So what kind of issues can you run into from having that post-show or prolonged post-show binge, should you say?
Yeah. So this is like one of those areas that I said I'm really interested in and really, I suppose, personally afflicted by. So when I competed, I've said this before, but I put on 29 pounds in 9 days post show.
Wow.
Yeah. So, you know, huge amount of water weight, you know, salt, intestinal weight, but the amount I was eating, significant fat gain in just 9 days, which is, you know, absolutely absurd. If I had a general population client say to me, oh, I weigh whatever, 10 pounds more in 9 days, I'd go, you know, something strange has gone on here, but it's not fat, because if it was fat, you'd have to have been eating whatever, you know, what would it be, like 47,000 calories or something. So, but I genuinely was 10 calories every day. Just you know, the clinical term, which is something that we do see in eating disordered eating scenarios, and obviously when you're very, very lean, you do have this reduction in leptin, and which increases appetite and all of these things that we suffer from as when we're lean. And so the technical term is called hyperphagia, and it's just this obsession with food, this inability to be satiated. And I think probably most people who have been stage lean have felt like this, the ability to consume, you know, I have quite a poor appetite. And, you know, I remember when my daughter, she's what, 2.5 now, but she was about 1.5, and she would consume 30 grams of porridge. And, you know, I was weighing it out, and it, you know, it wasn't calorie counting for her or anything crazy like that, but I was just genuinely interested. And I was like, and she would nail 30 grams of porridge. And I was like, do you know what? 50 grams of porridge fills me up. This is ridiculous. Yeah, and, but bodybuilding show, it's like 100 grams of porridge. Brilliant. Next, 100 grams. And you are, you know, and it's that thing, you can be completely bloated. You can have your stretch receptors in your stomach saying, I'm full in a volume sense, but the signal is still, I'm still hungry. And I can remember eating until, you know, the point of being sick, and, you know, I wasn't sick, and therefore I'm still just as full as I was, and just taking, you know, watching telly and going, I'm just going to start eating again, because I had that hunger response. So these are things that competitors at very lean levels are noticing. So from my perspective, the whole concept of a reverse diet, recovery diet, whatever we want to do, and it's, you know, it's brilliant, the kind of message you're giving, that people need to regain some body fat, and they need to get themselves, you know, people say to me, oh, how quickly do you taper up calories post show? And it's like, well, there's no taper initially. It's just jump to not pre-diet maintenance, but if you were in a whatever 400 calorie deficit at the end of your diet, you just put those 400 calories back in, because you no longer need to lose body fat. If you only put 200 back in, or, you know, these crazy people putting in, what was it? It was like 4 grams of carbs a week or 10 grams of carbs a week. Absolutely bonkers. So, you know, at the very minimum, if you're in a 250 calorie deficit at the end of a diet, you're really lean, you add those 250 calories in instantly on the day, you know, Monday after the show, Sunday after the show. And then you do need to go into a surplus, because you do need to recover hormone levels. You need to recover your entire life, basically. So yeah, you know, that's a great message you're giving there. So this thing of the post-show binge, I'm a big fan of this reverse diet for simply a level this term can be used a little bit incorrectly, but there's kind of two things that we're talking about here. One is what you've mentioned about the insulin sensitivity side of things, you know, potential negative health effects, versus also they are physiological, but there's also a behavioral component of the down regulation that we get with dieting, that is not just, lots of people go, oh, your metabolism slows when you diet, and it's so it slows for kind of a couple of reasons. One is your basal metabolic rate slows down, your thyroid goes down, but the amount that contributes is actually really, really small compared to the weight that you've lost, which is kind of an obvious one. Walking around day to day weighing, let's say 10 kilos less, that burns less calories in every weight bearing thing you do day to day. But the most kind of the biggest factor that is impacted is this thing called NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And you might be, I mean, we've all seen the competitors on show day who, it's the biggest day of their life, they're in the best shape of their life, and they're like,
yeah.
And they're, you know, it's like, oh, you look really sad, and like, no, I'm so happy, I feel amazing. And they, you know, it's that whole facial tone is gone, you know, all the postural muscles, all these things that day to day, like even me kind of fidgeting here, I would be, yeah, Vicky, I'm really happy to be here. And it's, you're not angry, you're not moody, but it's literally being that lean, that down regulated, this metabolic adaptation, adaptive thermogenesis component. We can, you know, just going back to maintenance calories, we can start to recover some of that. And then pushing ourselves into a slight surplus, we can just recover that over and over. And actually, almost without gaining body fat, we can just push that higher and higher to, you know, the aim is to get back to the predicted maintenance, which the literature shows is probably kind of a 20% metabolic adaptation is the most that most of us are getting without any kind of clinical stuff going on. So, yeah, we might be, you know, our maintenance calories might be 1,400 calories after our diet, but actually without gaining much weight and without gaining much body fat, we can still maintain, but on 1,800 calories, you know, and then we're pushing that into the surplus to regain some of this body fat. And body fat is so important for well-being, for libido, for general feelings of wellness and vigor for life, essentially. So going back to, that's a really long route to give some background to your question of this kind of binge, whether it be, and I'll tell you something really interesting. A study that came out in the last, and I don't know the author's name because it's so new, but it's literally a 2017 study, maybe in the last 4 to 12 weeks, actually looked at a one-day binge. And because we know that insulin sensitivity can be hugely impacted by several days or, you know, weeks, and obviously being overweight, obesity, we know these things are related to type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance. But actually it showed, this study, it it was fascinating because I think the kind of funding for the study came from the idea that they were looking at binge eating disorder. So it's not actually people who are always overweight necessarily or anything like that. It was looking at the acute effect of a single bout of massive overfeeding. And I do think it was something like, 178% of maintenance calories. So say maintenance calories is, I don't know, 2,500, or I'll say 2,000 for a small female to make the maths easier for myself. We're talking like 3,560 calories for a small female. So it's quite a large calorie intake on a single day. And they showed a really, really statistically significant reduction in insulin sensitivity in just that one day.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I found that quite interesting that it was so profound. And I think the other thing to bear in mind with this study is, I think for food volume for the subjects, it was quite a high fat, which I think when people binge post show, I know I was kind of eating Galaxy bars by the gallon, and obviously that's kind of high sugar and high fat, but I was getting boatloads of fat in, and yeah, it was just everything that's highly palatable. But I think it was like a 60% fat diet, which is, seriously high. But yeah, it's not, in my experience of bodybuilding forums, competitors I've worked with, competitors I've spoken with, it's several days of just binging. It's a bit of a dirty word in a way, but that's what it is. No matter what they think it is, this whole obsession with planning. These people almost have the house stocked with 50,000 calories for the week post show. And I'm not saying this with any judgment either, because that was exactly me. And it's something that I really want to, because in 9 days, I undid 6 months of work. And the other thing is this is not well researched, and it's an area which is hugely lacking because unfortunately no one wants to give money to people like us for our sport. It's, in my opinion, it's probably a body fat. So I obviously recovered body fat, and therefore I did feel better.
Sure.
But in my opinion, doing that on a slower basis does leave you in a different state. So there are intelligent people who believe that it doesn't matter how quick you get there, as long as you get back to baseline, things will be righted. And I partly agree. I think it's multifactorial, that I think there's two components that are very difficult to separate, but they are slightly separable, in that you need to get your calories back to where they were and be in a surplus. And once you do that, it'll make you feel better. But you could be eating those calories, but if your body fat's still down here, you still will have that impairment of like testosterone levels, estrogen, progesterone in females, all of that stuff, thyroid. But your body fat, I don't know if I want to just see, looking at myself so that you can see my hands. Your body fat might be here and your calories might be up here. And if you go to the body fat really quickly, you might only recover these levels to a smaller extent. Whereas if you had pushed your body fat slowly there, you could actually maintain a lower percentage of body fat whilst calories coming higher. And it's this whole thing of nutrient partitioning, metabolic capacity. Some people are genetically gifted and they are able to build metabolic capacity much greater than other people. In general, females are worse off than males. And in general, the older you are, the less your metabolic adaptation occurs upwards, and probably it's more adaptive downwards, so it tries to stop you losing fat more. So it's unfortunate. Getting old sucks. But yeah, so I think I would really recommend to people, like, don't hammer post-show calories too hard. Being in a surplus, like, yes, gain some body fat quickly. And I think I actually just wrote a little list of things somewhere. I don't know if I'll be able to find it now, but it was like, no, no, I won't try and find it, but it was essentially, like I've already mentioned, libido. It's a great thing to be able to look at and go, you know, do I feel normal again? And if you don't, then you probably need to keep your body fat creeping up. It has your sleep recovered. Like, I don't know about you, but like my sleep was shocking towards the end of the diet once you're leaner and you're waking up after, you know, waking up after 4 hours and going, okay, time to eat. You know, evolutionist, you know, I need to go hunting essentially to go and find food. I'm not going to sit asleep. My adrenaline's high, my cortisol's very high. Is sleep recovered? Is the hyperphagia gone for a start? You know, these different things that we can use to kind of, and this is why having a coach is quite good. So someone to be a bit more objective and go, you know, ask you these questions. Do you feel right again? And, you know, sometimes people are maybe too pro jamming in calories, and sometimes people are too pro, but I want to stay in shape. And that's everyone's own decision, but probably staying with lines in your glutes or, you know, whatever is not good. I mean, we could start talking about bone mineral density, you know, to go really far down the line. And then there is, you know, bodybuilding is mostly healthy. Natural bodybuilding is mostly healthy, but once you're at those really low body fat levels, unfortunately, it, just like most sports, there's an unhealthy extreme that I'm saying you probably do need to go to those dark places. Sport, just like driving a fast car, you need to take risks. But mostly, you know, we can do it in a healthy way. But it's, if you're going to just keep yourself jammed low, like I haven't even mentioned it, which is ridiculous, the fact that I'm talking to you, but menstrual cycle, you know, has your menstrual cycle normalized, and that will take some time. So it's not right.
If ever, to be honest. Yeah.
And for some people, that is a real risk. And that's a really good point. Like when you get a new client, they want us to compete, there's always a discussion over, you know, are they an individual who's like, I haven't had kids, but, you know, we're getting married in a year, and, you know, then we're thinking about kids, and then, oh, by the way, can you get me absolutely shredded? And that's going to, you know, it's at least giving that person the information so they can make the decision for themselves.
Definitely. And it's a really good, important point about that. I mean, I did watch your seminar on hormones, and basically saying if your hormones are jacked, there's not really a great deal that you can do about it. You can try and optimize them as much as you can, but realistically, unless you start taking some kind of estrogenic aid, they're really going to be jacked for ages. And people obviously know this about me, but I lost my menstrual cycle back in 2014 in November, and it has never regained. So this is the kind of dark place that we're talking about in going to bodybuilding preps and being so super lean, and the fact that obviously everything can get down regulated. Now, other than obviously, I might put a link up to your seminar for the hormones, actually, because it was a really interesting one to listen to. But other than that, is there a way that you can actually get to those levels of body fat without causing so much detriment to your hormones? Or is it basically a question of when rather than if? Yeah,
good question. Wow, this wasn't in the show notes, everyone.
Sorry, no.
It's a brilliant question. You did tell me we'd take tangents, so
I did.
Yeah, it hasn't been studied again, so I always want to preface that, obviously being a bit of a flag bearer for evidence-based practice, and then I'm on a podcast telling people stuff that no one can find a reference for. So this, you know, it's me drawing on lots of information that I've read and experienced, etc. So if we draw on the research by a researcher called Anne Lauck, she's done lots of work in what used to be called the female athlete triad, and they've renamed it to REDS, which is like relative energy deficiency, so that it's not like a sexist triad or whatever. And so there's this thing called energy availability, which is an equation which is the number of calories consumed or the number of calories left after you've taken exercise energy expenditure into account. And that's where it massively falls down. I was at a conference once and she was presenting and I asked this question. And given that she's been in this, you know, researching this for probably a couple of decades, I was really surprised at her lack of, it was like I was the first person who'd ever asked it. And, you know, at the same time, at the time, I was like, look at me, I'm so clever. But then I was like, what the hell? Like, why has no one else asked this? Or why doesn't she have a better answer? But like defining exercise energy expenditure. So, you know, if you walk around, for me, if I had to do a day of shopping, you know, you go shopping, carrying shopping bags for whatever, round town for 4 hours, I'd be wrecked. I'd probably get DOMS. So is that exercise? But in the kind of old school definitions, like that's neat, which is weird. Like that's classed the same as fidgeting. It's like they're not the same thing. So I actually created something called NENAT, which is non-exercise, non-activity thermogenesis, which is then that's the fidgeting, and then NEAT is all this other stuff that before it becomes prescribed or preempted exercise that you've set out to do. So anyway, you minus that off, and the calories that you're left with that you've consumed, you then divide that by fat-free mass. So you know, total body mass, get rid of the body fat, and then divide that. And you can find these curves, and essentially it looks at, so I think they start at like maybe 50 calories per kilogram fat-free mass, 40 calories. And at 30 calories, this is where we start to see kind of fairly major disruptions, hormonal disruptions in females. So this 30 kilograms per fat-free mass is where things like luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone pulsatility are hugely downregulated. So that they're, you know, I'm sure your listeners from your other podcasts are kind of aware of these things, and within the menstrual cycle, stimulating the release of the egg, etc. So now the problem is I don't know if you can get in show condition below that. And like, it would be really cool. Like you could look at all of the female competitors that you know, and like you could all try and work it out and see if anyone's done it. So this is where we're going back like 10 years now. John Berardi had this thing that he called G-flux. Yeah. And do you remember that?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
It's just like, so, and the kind of really, really basic premises of it was like nutrient partitioning is better when you train, and therefore it's better to kind of push expenditure up than bring calories down, and you'll end up with a better body composition, these kind of things. So drawing on, I mean, that was just sort of something he made up, but it's also kind of cool. That was the era that I got into nutrition. That's, you know, nowadays I'm like, oh yeah, behavior change is important, and we all need to worry about adherence, and, you know, doesn't really matter what your macros are as long as your calories and your protein are good, and yeah, you should eat some vegetables. But back then I was like, yes, what's the optimal split of this, and like G-flux. But anyway, so also another thing is, so skinfold caliper testing, like I've done skinfold caliper testing on some competitors, on, you know, elite athletes, and I've worked with female sprinters, and the key thing here is remembering the genetic component, in that maybe they are just genetically wired to be able to exist whilst abilities. So it's that you have to bear that in mind. But at the same time, in the way that these guys train, they're training hard, high intensity interval training all year round, kind of a consistent diet rather than kind of up and down phases like bodybuilders might do. They're not necessarily trying to gain maximum amount of muscle, so they don't really ever need to be in a, you know, any sort of surplus. Particularly, they are blessed with a certain level of muscle mass anyway because they're sprinters, but their levels of body fat, they're not far off. You know, they wouldn't need a long diet to get into stage shape, and they've still got their menstrual cycle. So, you know, there's this argument of, could do we need to push, build off-season metabolic capacity as much as that is possible, have calories nice and high, and then try not to go below this 30 calories per kilogram fat-free mass. And therefore, if you stop losing body fat and you're there, then it's a case of, well, we need to push up. We need to keep food higher and push expenditure up, but not expenditure that is, I suppose, requires recovery, requires recovery capabilities. And if we did that, maybe, I'm just completely postulating here, that might be a way that we can actually, because we're still supplying an absolute amount, a raw material amount of free fatty acids, of micronutrients, of, a diet. There's still an actual amount of food for the body to use. So
sure, it's not starving.
Yeah, exactly. It's not, give or take, 1,200 calories a day with 400 to 600 calories worth of energy expenditure on top type scenario. So in my mind, that would be how you would do it. And likewise, you would diet for the last part of your diet. You might, let's say, people are dieting like the shortest diet for these freaks who just 6 weeks and on stage, but I competed against a few of them. So 12 weeks, it would be, okay, the first 8 weeks, keep it the same speed, happy days. The last 4 weeks, you actually extend to maybe another 12 weeks, and it's much, much slower. And I do often find people who look at the scales a little bit too much, because in especially females, the scales suck. And especially in the situation of food obsession, essentially chronic starvation, if we're going to be frank, and low body fat levels, we do get this increase in water retention because of this kind of interaction. And we can see this in, there's studies on restricted eaters. So people who have greater restrictive eating behaviors have higher cortisol levels consistently. So in this scenario of lower calorie intake, higher cortisol, water retention, the scales then flipping screw with your head. People diet even harder, even though the fact that they were progressing fine. And at that stage, photos like, do I look okay? Have I got the lighting the same? Have I lost fat off my glutes or my lower back? And I'm looking at my front, and my front doesn't look any leaner. Like all of these things that's flipping, like you're smiling like, yeah, we've all been there.
You know it, yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of there at the minute. I'm dieting at the minute, and I'm just focusing on the scales, and me and one of my staff are kind of competing for percentage weight loss, but whatever. So I'm like looking at the scales, normally I weigh myself in boxers and a t-shirt, and then I'm like taking my t-shirt off, like
everything, watch, rings, everything, yeah.
Shading. So what was I saying? Yeah, so they kind of push the diet a bit too hard, when if they had a slightly more objective method, I'm a big fan of skin fold caliper testing when done correctly, or just trusting the process and maybe getting ready for a show early, that kind of concept of like, okay, give yourself an extra flipping 10 weeks until the show, and you don't even have to maintain or keep going down. You could start building calories back in as long as you maintain condition and these kind of things. So answer, but that's how I would guess, basically.
I think it's a really good thing that we can try and have a trial of. The thing that really bugs me so much is that there are no kind of scientific studies done on women, because we are so complicated. And these kind of hormonal things, I think it would be a really interesting thing to actually study, make the difficult part the interesting study. Our hormones compared to men are all over the place, but in order to optimize them and in order to try and get a healthier way of getting stage lean, women do need to be studied. So it's really unfortunate that we haven't got access to those studies, or that scientists don't want to actually study us. And that's one of the reasons why I started this podcast, because I was sick and tired of not actually finding the answers for myself. So I thought, well, do you know what? I'll do it myself, which is, a good thing. But anyway, we're rambling a little bit now, aren't we? So we are coming up to time now, and I understand you're an extremely busy man. So one thing that I do want to plug a lot of, which is really exciting stuff, is that if you guys have really enjoyed Martin talking about his knowledge base there and about everything else, I mean, we could go on for hours with his knowledge, but he has got a conference coming up in December with Alan Aragon, who again is a very, very evidence-based practitioner. And well, Martin, you tell us more about that one.
Yeah, so thanks. This so Alan, if people aren't aware, because not everyone is, Alan's kind of been two things. He calls himself the Wrong Burgundy of nutrition, which is, I think, a very cool title, and he's kind of like the older, more experienced, been around for longer American version of me, as it were. And or I'm the British version of him. So yeah, he's brilliant. He's worked with some top level bodybuilders. He's got some really cool clients, like the one that I think everyone sort of fanboys over is he worked with Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Yes, how cool is that?
Yeah, it's cool, yeah. And he even called him. It was like literally Stone Cold called him up and was like, "I've done my research. I want to work with you. I hear you're really good." Like, how cool would that be?
Amazing.
So. Yeah, we've got him coming over on the 9th of December, and he's doing a whole day of new content. And, you know, not that I'm, think that I'm anything of massive worth, but if people are, wanting to come and chat to me at all, it's like, I will be there. All of the MNU tutors will be there. Loads of other kind of like-minded evidence-based practitioners. Alan's doing the whole day. And, also to anyone who's been to our conferences before knows that we kind of look after people, like constant free tea and coffee, like really nice. It's a really nice venue, free refreshments all day. Probably if you're on a diet it'll be difficult, but we have had people turning up with their prepped meals before, and
Tupperware life.
Yeah, respect to them. But yeah, and like a really nice 4-star buffet lunch and everything like that. So yeah, if people want to, then again, that's on the Mac-Nutrition Uni /Alan. I can give you a link for that one. And yeah, if people want to come to that, then check it out. They can drop me messages to find out more details. But all of the kind of dates, times, costs, topic titles are all listed on that webpage that I said there. So yeah.
Fantastic. And I do have the link for that one, so I'll put that in the show notes as well, underneath the YouTube channel as well. So make sure, guys, that you go onto that one. I myself am going to be there as well as a couple of other people that you all well know. So I won't name drop any names, but I'm going to be there, Martin's going to be there, and Alan's going to be there. So who else do you want, really? That's it. So, okay, excellent. So that was a really great conversation. I really enjoyed that, Martin. Thank you so much for giving up your time for us today. And guys, as per usual, give us a review on iTunes, because then I can get even more amazing guests like Martin on. And if you have any questions whatsoever, as per usual, get in touch with myself, get in touch with Martin, put some questions on YouTube. All the links for Instagram, and I'll obviously put Martin's underneath as well. So until next time, thank you so much again, Martin.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I'll speak to you guys all next week.